Greetings, book lovers everywhere. My name is E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks. Today, I'm excited to be chatting with actress, mother, and award-winning author, Emily Barth Isler. Woo, round of applause for her. I'm going to be chatting with her about her debut middle grade novel, AfterMath, a heartwarming tale of acceptance, grief, and kindness. I have to say, I'm so honored to be chatting with you, Emily.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. This is so exciting. I've been looking forward to this.
So, before I move on to questions, I'd like to mention that AfterMath explores topics not featured in any other middle grade novels I've read before. It's so special. And that leads me to my first question. Lucy, the middle grader protagonist, is a very relatable and likable character. But she's dealing with a lot. After having lost someone very close to her, she's having to start a brand new school. And we soon learn that she's going to have even more challenges to face at her new school. Can you share why you chose to write a story where all of the characters were dealing with loss?
Yes, well, thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that you find her relatable. That obviously makes me really happy. And that is really the main reason I wanted to show different kinds of loss and grief within the book. I wanted readers to be able to find some way to relate to at least one of the characters. And so when I started thinking about writing a book that dealt with the aftermath of a school shooting, which is a cause about which I felt really passionate for pretty much my whole life, which is gun control and ending gun violence, I thought, this is a subject that's not accessible to everybody, that not everybody relates to or connects to or has thought about. So I wanted to make sure that there was sort of another avenue into the emotional life of the characters. And so it was important to me that the main character, Lucy, not herself be a survivor of a school shooting, so that she, like most of the readers, was kind of an outsider coming into this dynamic of the other students, and so that the reader could really relate to her and align with her in terms of what it's like to walk into that or read into that experience and feel like an outsider. So I really wanted her also, though, to have the language and the emotional depth to relate to those kids too. So I wanted to give her her own experience with grief. And honestly, some of that was based on some stuff going on in my life to people I knew. The loss of Lucy's brother, Theo, is based on a friend of a friend who I had watched go through a similar loss. And so in some ways, I chose those two topics, the two different kinds of grief and loss in the book, based on things that were going on in the world that were really bothering me and things that I felt like I just needed to write about because I needed a way to process it and talk about it. And I also know that anytime I'm struggling with something, chances are good that other people are struggling with it. And writing in books is such a safe and comfortable way, I think, to wade gently into hard things, because kids can sort of use their own mental imagination to get as deep or not into it as they can. And I really, when I was a kid, books like AfterMath on other topics were really such a safe space for me to start dealing with some challenging things or hard things or things I was scared of. And I wanted to give kids that gift that I had as a kid.
That's so important, like including things in your life that are important to you and that are kind of just big. They're big topics. And as kids, we need to kind of learn from those topics and just expand our horizons and be better. So it's time for my next question. That was such a great answer.
Oh, thank you. It's a great question.
It's actually kind of bringing me to tears. That was so good.
Oh, thank you.
So I read in the author's note of Aftermath that your story is based on real events. But despite that, I know that your novel is realistic fiction. How did you manage to put your own little fiction into Aftermath?
I love this question because it's definitely something I thought a lot about and get asked about a lot, of sort of the difference between, mining from your own life, which I certainly did, and pulling things from news headlines, which is where I get a lot of my inspiration because I love seeing what's going on in the world. That's what tells me what people are thinking about, what kids might have questions about. It's where I get my best ideas. And I think the key is actually to do a lot of research, but not too much research. I didn't want to tell somebody else's story. It's not a biography. It's not a research news piece or anything. It is definitely, as you said, fiction. So it's really finding the balance between reading a lot of news articles. My background is also in journalism, so I have a lot of training as a journalist, and I know how to sort of do that research and tell the story, but then to really take a step back and say, but this is not my story to tell any of the real life stories. It's my job to put on my empathy hat, which is where my background in acting really comes in handy. And I know we're going to talk about that some later, but this is my opportunity to say, okay, got all the facts and sort of the background, and now it's time to put myself into the shoes of the characters and sort of think, what would I do? Writing is a lot of empathizing, as is reading, which is why it's so phenomenal for dealing with hard things. We put ourselves in the shoes of the characters, and then we also ask, what will they understand about the other characters, and what will they not understand about the other characters? Because nobody can read minds, at least not in realistic fiction. I mean, that would be cool, and that would be another great book, but not realistic fiction. And there was something else I was going to say about, yes, in terms of doing the research and not too much research, it was important to me to really take a mix of facts and fiction. So for example, the mime class is based on my real life. When I was in 6th grade, I did a mime class in middle school, and it was such a cool experience and really transformative. And the teacher teaching Zeno's paradox concept of infinity was also pulled from my real life. I had a teacher who taught us that concept, and I remember feeling, as Lucy does in the book, this kind of deep sadness about the concept of infinity and never actually getting somewhere. So those two things I pulled from real life, and then everything else was pulled from either fiction or other people's real lives. And then it's really like weaving together a tapestry of all those different elements, and finding the right balance of how much to draw from the news, how much to draw from my life. And when I was submitting this book to publishers, it was really funny. One of the first rejections we got was a publisher who said, I don't believe the mime thing. Like, who would take a mime class? And I thought that was so funny, because that was one of the few things that was actually based on my life versus all the things I'd pulled from other people's lives or made up. And I was like, well, that's the only true thing. So if you don't buy it, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, there are two things I want to say in response to your answer. One, I hear a lot about balance, like balancing the real from the fiction and kind of just making the perfect story. It's all about balance. And also, I think the mime class is probably one of my favorite parts of the story, because I think it was just really meaningful. Like, it's like looking from life at a different perspective. And also you kind of take that from your own life. And I think that's really important in books.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really important to me that there be some kind of artistic class going on, because theater and acting has been such a big part of my life. So obviously I knew that if I were Lucy's mom, I would be like, oh, you need to take some kind of class where you work as a group and talk about feelings and expressing yourself, right? So I knew I wanted that for her, sort of as not just the writer, but also as a mom figure. But I didn't want it to be like, I read a lot of books, a lot of characters take acting classes or do improv. I wanted it to be something different. And I had this cool experience in my life with mime. And so I thought, wow, and as I say in the book, it was also cool to me, Lucy and her peers in her new school have all been through a lot of loss and a lot of grief. They've all had lots of therapy. They've had lots of grown-ups telling them a million words, read this, let's talk about this, let's say this. I wanted to put them in a place where they weren't using words at all. I thought that was just a really cool juxtaposition to their life.
Wow. Yeah, it's like, I think miming, it's kind of a mix of both like improvisation and also just acting in general, because I think it's sometimes really hard to just explain like I think mine is like so perfect. Like you can explain what you're thinking without saying anything. And I think that's just a really interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, I found it really challenging as a kid who, when I took the mime class, I had been working as an actor already and was really used to having a script and using words and songs and music, and to strip all of that away and have to learn to express myself without words or a script or music was really different and really helpful to me.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to my next question, like loss and stuff. How can we stop school shootings and break-ins?
That is such a great question. And of course, as you know, there's no easy answer, because if there were an easy answer, we'd be doing it. But I will say, that question is what made me want to write the book in the first place, because it's something I feel really, really, really passionately about. I do really want to end gun violence. And it all comes back to activism, legislation. We need to make comprehensive laws that keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. To put it really simply, we regulate use of cars. If you want to drive a car, you have to have a license, and you register your car, and you take a class to make sure you can pass a test to make sure you're a responsible car owner. So we don't have anything like that in terms of guns. Obviously different states and different countries have different laws, and we've seen examples of where this works really well, like in Australia and New Zealand and some other countries. And they've had, one or two terrible mass shootings, and immediately the government decides, okay, we need to regulate this, we need to legislate, we need to stop this. They make laws, and it doesn't happen again. There's so much we can't control, but I think what I find really frustrating and upsetting about gun violence is it's totally preventable. It's unnecessary. Unfortunately, there are lots of ways that people are injured in accidents, car accidents, airplane accidents, things happen, right? But with gun violence, it's so upsetting to me because it's also so preventable. We've seen these examples in other countries where good legislation has limited and regulated gun use. And so, I'm not saying we should take away all guns from everybody all the time, although, in some ways that would be great, but I do understand certain needs for guns. It's not a simple problem, but it should be just as regulated, if not more so, than car use or anything else where, it's a real safety issue and people have a lot of power. And I really hope that any day now, AfterMath right now is shelved in realistic contemporary fiction. And I would love for it someday to be put in history and kids to read it and say, oh, this used to be a thing, but of course we don't do that anymore. And of course, AfterMath will always be contemporary because it deals with grief and loss and friendship in broader ways, I hope. But in terms of the school shooting aspect, I would really love to see that become a history book as soon as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. There are always two sides of an argument, but I see yours and I see others, but like I 100% agree. I think that while guns, there are some uses that are really important. We can't just use them on a regular basis and like barging into schools like in AfterMath.
Right, exactly. And I live in a city, and so I don't know what it's like. I know people who live in more rural places, or I recently watched this really amazing farm documentary called Biggest Little Farm, about a farm in California. And they have guns, they have coyotes who are attacking their chickens. You can make arguments for almost anything being necessary in certain cases, but it's the regulation and the oversight, the education that's really, really important. And another thing that I really want to mention is that I pledged at the beginning and have continued to do so, that I donate a portion of my proceeds from every sale of every copy of AfterMath to certain organizations that I really love who are working towards eliminating senseless gun violence and creating safe gun laws and helping people who've been victims or no victims of shootings. So there are a couple organizations I really particularly like working with, and just to name a few, Moms Demand Action is great. Every Town, the Anna Grace Project, Sandy Hook Promise, Survivors Empowered, Choose Love. There are so many organizations out there doing the work, and it was really important to me that with every sale of Aftermath, we're donating a little bit towards that important work.
That's just, I love how you donate, all, like, because authors don't make like every single penny the book makes. So I love how you just, that's basically what writing books is all about. It's not just about the money. It's about kind of like, for instance, Aftermath, not just writing about a certain topic, but also kind of doing something to stop whatever bad thing is happening.
Right. And I'm so inspired by the question you asked, because I've said from the very beginning of this book, it's not like it supplies the answers to this problem of gun violence or any kind of loss or grief. But what it does is start conversations and ask questions. And if every student who reads it asks the question of, what can we do about this? Whether it's with Aftermath or any other book, you know, I see you've got all these great posters and bookmarks and things on the wall behind you as I'm looking at you, and things like Starfish, books like that bring up really important social issues. If we as writers, you know, writers are I like to think, another kind of teacher. Mm-hmm. And so basically, when you're writing for children, not necessarily other genres, but when you're writing for children, you are partially an educator. And if you want to be a responsible educator, you're hopefully asking the right questions and giving kids the resources to start looking into the answers for those questions. And so I really hope that everybody who reads the book asks the questions just like you did. And that's really important.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to another question of mine. It's kind of like based on questions, a little bit different though. Mm-hmm. So Lucy has a secret friend who always puts a funny math joke on Lucy's desk nearly every day. So how did you come up with the idea for the math jokes? Are you a big math fan?
I'm a huge math fan. You know, when I started writing the book, it always had math in it. It had less math, though. It was always that Lucy's brain sort of works that way, and she sees things in mathematical equations. That was kind of from the beginning. But, you know, I think it was my agent, Kari Sutherland, who's wonderful, who read the book, and we were talking about how it is a pretty sad story in a lot of places, and it is kind of a heavy topic. And she said, you know, how could we infuse it with elements of, you know, a little more lightness, a little more humor? And so I said, well, I mean, I don't know, it's not really a book where you can just like tell jokes in the middle of the book. And then I was like, wait, but maybe we can, using the math. You know, it was nice to have the math. It's sort of Lucy's coping mechanism. And then through that conversation with Kari, she gave me the idea that maybe math could also kind of be a good coping mechanism for the reader as they read it, that it's a distraction, it's a little bit different from the rest of the book. And then by using the math jokes, it infuses like tiny bits of humor. I'm not saying it turns the book into a comedy, because obviously, you know, the overall tone of the book stayed the same. But it also gave me a way. I really wanted to find a way for Lucy to explore her relationships with the different people in the book. And as she tries to figure out who might be leaving her the math jokes, it gives her a chance to think about Bet, the girl who used to live in her room, and think about her relationship with her mom and her relationship with her dad, and sort of what she believes and what is possible. So it really gave me a lot of, you know, material to work with. But I also really I love math and I love jokes. And, you know, my kids and I like making up puns together, and math jokes are, you know, there's so many puns and so many, you know, just like corny, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, puns are very punny.
Dad jokes, you know, and it's just like, you know, I am like a huge dad joke teller. So it was really fun to include that.
Yeah, I love the topic of jokes in books, like, because Aftermath is a really difficult read, and it's kind of for middle graders. But if you don't really include the jokes and kind of the humorous, not too humorous side of it, it could really be considered a book for young adults or adults. So just adding a little bit of humor, a little bit of kind of just kidness inside of the read, it's just really important, and it kind of lightens up the mood a little bit, but not too much.
I'm so glad you think that way. And you know, we certainly wrestled a little bit with what age range this was appropriate for. You know, in my head, Lucy was always 12. That was such a formative age for me. It was really important to me that she and her peers be 12, and in 7th grade, it just felt so right. But it is a heavy topic. And so, you know, I think the jokes, as you were sort of pointing out, also keep reminding the reader that these are just kids, and like they've been dealt a lot of really difficult circumstances, but they are 7th graders and they're dealing with all the normal stuff that kids around that age deal with, on top of all the other bigger stuff. But the jokes are kind of a great reminder that it's like, oh, these are kids. Okay, we're still kids. Yeah,
they're kids, but like they're not adults like who've just kind of faced like horrible circumstances, but they're also kind of kids. They have a kid mind. Like they're not just,
you can't rush that, you know, you can't age yourself up regardless of what you've had to experience, you know.
Yeah. So do you see a piece of yourself or your life in any of the characters?
I mean, you know, writing a book is a lot like having a kid. And I say that as a parent. I have 2 kids, and it feels to me like there are little pieces of me in pretty much every character in the book. There are also a lot of people in my life woven into the book. For example, the teacher character, Mr. Jackson, who's this really empathetic, awesome, encouraging teacher, is based on many different people in my life, but really primarily 2 teachers I had. One in middle school, the teacher who taught that mime class I took, his name is Mr. Terry Sullivan. And then in high school, my math teacher, Mr. Eric Ebersol, who taught that infinity lesson like that. Those 2 teachers had such a strong impact on me, which I think is evident in the fact that I'm now in my 40s and I still remember both of those experiences like it was yesterday. And so for, you know, to be 25 years later, still thinking about a math lesson or a class that I took is really special. And I wanted to highlight how teachers are so valuable and in our society undervalued, underpaid, underappreciated, but how their impact is truly lifelong. And I wanted the Mr. Jackson character in the book to be an alternative for Lucy. You know, her parents, I really think are wonderful parents and are doing their best, but they're going through something really hard, the loss of their son. And they're not as available to Lucy in the way that they, I think, would like to be in a perfect world. They're really not able to give her everything they want to give her emotionally at that time. So I wanted to show kids that you can always look for somebody else in your life. If you're not able to get what you need from the grown-up that you live with, there are always, you know, and Mr. Rogers had this great quote, look for the helpers. You know, whenever something terrible happens, look for the helpers, look for those people who are there and who are listening and who want to help. So it was important to me that Mr. Jackson represent all of the people in my life who have helped me, who have been there at times when, you know, I needed somebody, or, you know, just felt lost or felt like the world was this big, scary place. And I would look and see people doing amazing things, volunteering, offering their time, being kind. It really does make a difference. So in that way, you know, Mr. Jackson is definitely those 2 teachers, but he's also every wonderful, kind friend I've ever had and every good person in my life. You know, Lucy reminds me a lot of me in some ways, although I, of course, didn't go through what she went through at that age. Like I said, you know, so much of reading and writing is about empathy. And so there were pieces of me that I put into her in terms of, you know, anyone who's ever felt a little bit lost or a little bit left out or started a new school or moved to a new town can probably relate to Lucy, you know, and same with Avery. You know, everybody who's ever felt like they're, you know, ostracized because of something outside of their control or teased for something that isn't their fault can probably relate to Avery.
Yeah, and also on the topic of teachers, it is Teacher Appreciation Week, so thank you to all you amazing teachers.
Yes, thank you, teachers. Big shout out to those 2 teachers I mentioned. And I have to say what's really cool is that Mr. Ebersol, who was my math teacher in high school, is now a state legislator representative in the state of Maryland, where I grew up. He's part of the state government, which I think is so cool because it's another awesome way that he's contributing to, you know, the life of all of his former students and people who are students now. And so a big shout out to Mr. Ebersol for doing that. Super cool.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ebersol. And thank you to all you teachers who are listening or watching on YouTube. You guys are amazing. We appreciate you. And like Emily said, educators, they can be our best friends, and they're always there for us if we need them.
Yes, and they're so underappreciated. So I appreciate that you're appreciating them right now. And I always am too. It's fun to get to watch it now as a parent, see that my kids have these amazing teachers who are really shaping their lives. And I'm so grateful because there are some ways in which, again, I as a parent can't give everything to my kids all the time. And it really does, as they say, take a village. It's no one or two people can give a kid every perspective, every experience, every support. I'm so grateful to the teachers in my life right now who are teaching my kids the things that no one or two people can do.
I just checked on Twitter and then I saw, hey, that's Emily Barth Isler's book. It's being nominated on the recommended reading list for the month of May, Mental Health Awareness Month. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's the Society of Children's Books. Wait, SCBWI, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Which is a really awesome organization, as I think most writers and teachers know about, for people who want to write for children, love to read for children, want to support people who write for children. And I'm really glad that they are doing this for Mental Health Awareness Month. Obviously, I think mental health is everything and super crucial and something we need to talk about more. So I'm really glad.
Yeah, I'm glad for you. So, Lucy goes to a mime class, which inspires her to come out of her shell and be herself. Have you ever been a part of a class as a kid or as an adult that's made you feel seen like Lucy?
Definitely. And speaking of teacher appreciation, I had several mentors as a kid. I started acting professionally when I was 5, which is a really sort of different and unique experience. And I acted mostly in theater as a kid, and then as an adult did some television and film, but as a kid was really mostly involved in theater. And I had some incredible mentors who really encouraged me to keep challenging myself and step out of the box. And, I think about it sometimes because I didn't end up continuing to act professionally through my adult life, but I really do see those acting classes and those experiences as the seeds towards me becoming a writer. And as I was saying, writers and sort of being educators. I think of myself baseline, bottom line as a storyteller. And then that can take so many forms. That was, sort of what got me into acting was I love telling stories. But what got me into writing was that I loved those stories so much. I wanted to control the stories and tell the stories. But, some of those mentors I had, Toby Ornstein, Carol Graham Lehan, are two people who really stand out to me, who helped me get out of my comfort zone, keep learning, keep growing. And I really think of them as not just acting teachers, but writing teachers.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me into my next question related to acting teachers. So I read that you were actually an actress before you started your writing career. You don't hear that every day, so congratulations on your acting career.
Oh, thank you.
So I happen to enjoy both acting and writing as well. I think one reason I enjoy both is because they allow me to escape into other worlds. So would you share with us what you loved most about acting and what prompted you to switch passions and begin writing?
Yeah, the more I work as a writer, the more I see all of the connections. When I was working as an actor, I always wanted to know what the characters were thinking and why people do what they do and how the person who wrote the script or the play or the musical got those ideas. And I was always really interested in the writing process. And then when I was in 6th grade, again, that same teacher who taught the mime class, Mr. Terry Sullivan, actually encouraged me to write a play. And I'd never thought about writing a play because I always assumed that in order to write a play, you had to be a grown-up. Honestly, kind of had to be, at that time, I hadn't been to expose a lot of to a lot of different playwrights. And so I was like, well, most playwrights are old white men, and I'm none of those things. You know, I'm not an old white man. So it just sort of didn't occur to me, even though I, you know, should have been able to see that. It didn't occur to me that I could write a play. So Mr. Sullivan told me, you know, this is your assignment. You have to write a play, not just be in one. And so I did. And then we cast it and I directed it and we put up the play at my middle school. And that experience was obviously like huge for me and so transformative, because I was able to really sort of break out of this idea that playwrights were, you know, a certain kind of people, and writers in general were grown-ups, and all of those misconceptions I had as a kid. So that was one formative experience. And another way that I was really lucky is that my dad is a writer and my grandfather was a writer. So I had examples in my life of people who were writers having careers, being able to do that. So I always knew, I was like, okay, definitely, I want to do that someday. But acting was sort of this path that I got on, you know, almost by accident as a 5-year-old, and just kept going on for a long time. And what I really loved about it was the storytelling. And I just wanted to find more ways to tell stories. And so writing was, to me, a very natural progression, to come from, you know, being the person on stage saying the words to like, wow, well, I kind of want to be the person writing the words, you know, and it sort of feels to me like part of my growing up was realizing that I wanted to tell the stories as the writer. And transitioning to that was, you know, in some ways hard, but also very natural. I worked as an actor for a company that then invited me to start writing some of my own material. I was able to make that transition really slowly and very organically. And then I realized, I was like, wow, I really enjoy the writing a lot more than I'm enjoying the acting.
Well, I've got to say, first of all, I really want to learn more about your play. And also, I'm just very like, I want to say I'm so proud of your 6th grade self. Like, just kind of, people believe that it's just old white men who can make plays, but that's not the case. Anybody can do it. And you kind of, like, thanks to Mr. Sullivan, you kind of believed that you just didn't care what others thought. You just fought through and you created a play that was performed at your middle school.
Yeah, I mean, he gave me such an incredible gift too, because I think young people, and particularly when I was young women, were really taught that a lot of what was important was the way people perceived us. And certainly as a young woman who was an actor, I felt that times 1,000, that so much of it was about how I looked, how I sounded, how I acted. And so to sort of flip the script on that and have Mr. Sullivan say, no, your assignment, you know, maybe everybody else is going to be in the play, but your assignment is to write the play, was totally game changing for me. And I'm so grateful.
Yeah. And now, thanks to Mr. Sullivan, you're in the writing career. And I really hope that you do write another book in the future.
I am working on one right now. Ooh. So that's happening.
And that's kind of my next question. Are you working on any books or any writing projects currently?
Yes, I actually just signed the contract for my 2nd book. I'm not allowed to say anything about it yet until it's officially announced, but it's happening and I couldn't be more thrilled. And I love my editor so much, Amy Fitzgerald, and I'm so excited I'm going to get to work with her again, which is all I ever wanted, was that experience. I've learned so much from her through the process of working on AfterMath. I'm so excited we're working together again.
Well, I'm so excited for you. About it. Yeah, I'm so excited for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So is there someone in your life, a parent, teacher, friend, or role model, or author, who inspired and motivated you to start your writing journey?
Well, definitely Mr. Sullivan in 6th grade by encouraging me to write that play. But there have been so many people along the way who really told me that I was a writer. I mean, I can think of a million examples and I don't want to leave anyone out, but, you know, I have the friend and colleague who hired me as an actor and then also gave me the opportunity to write is a man named Mike Stickle, who's been a really huge supporter of my career as an adult. And he said to me, you know, I think you're a writer, like you need to be doing this. I think it's such a good reminder for people that a little encouragement can go a long way. When you see something in somebody, being able to say that is so special, and you never know how your words might affect them.
If you could be or meet any character in any book, any time period, just any book, who would you be or who would you meet and why?
I mean, this question is so hard because I feel like the answer changes moment by moment. Every time I read a book, I want to dive in there and meet the character. I mean, I think one book that had such a tremendous impact on me that I have to mention at this point is the book The Giver by Lois Lowry. And I actually reference it in Aftermath. I have Lucy, the main character, reading that book at lunch because it was such a special book to me. And I read it when I was her age. Or I think I was a little older. I think it came out in 1992 or 93. So I was 12 or 13. And it was just really the first time I'd read a book that questioned authority in that way, that said like, oh, maybe adults don't have all the answers just because they happen to be adults. And like, maybe people make mistakes and adults make mistakes and parents do their best, but it's not always right. And just all of these ideas that I really hadn't thought about before. So I would probably want to get into the world of that book and get to, I don't know, experience it from any and all perspective. I mean, I know I don't mean to like shirk the question and be too general, but I would love to get into The Giver and be pretty much every character from Jonah on up. But every time I read a book, it feels a little bit like I am getting that experience. I'm a really big fan. There's so many authors I love. Sadia Farooqi is an author I really love. She's Pakistani and she writes about characters who are from Pakistan or currently in Pakistan. And I love when books like that get to take me into a culture or a country or a religion or anything that I haven't gotten to experience, because we only get one life each. We only get one chance to do this. And books give you the opportunity to do a million other sort of side things through the characters. And I find that so exciting. So, I mean, the answer is absolutely every book ever. I'm sorry to be so lame that I just...
No, it's not lame. I would want every book that I've ever read. I would for sure just want to jump into that world. Any book that I'd rate a 10 out of 10 read, which I kind of rate every single one of my books 10 out of 10. Like I just
that's amazing.
Yeah, I love middle grade books, so just I love variety and stuff about that.
I love that. I mean, I also at different points of my life, I feel like there are books that have affected me differently. And like if I could, I think the first time I even thought about being an author, I was like 3 or 4, and my parents were reading the Little House on the Prairie books out loud to me. And I thought, okay, well, what if I was Laura Ingalls Wilder, or what if I was one of her sisters, or whatever. It's that sort of what if that takes you into a book and also helped me become a writer. So, Little House on the Prairie, and then Anne of Green Gables, and then The Giver, The Book Thief. I mean, there are just these sort of like benchmark books along the way of my life that have made me just want to dive in. And sometimes when I go to bookstores or libraries, I feel so sad that I know I'm never going to be able to read every single book. Like, I mean, it's impossible. Yeah. And so just imagining all the different lives and all the different paths is so exciting. I mean, it kind of all comes back to the infinity issue in Aftermath and Zeno's paradox of this idea that like if books are infinite, which they certainly are, if stories are infinite, we will never read all of them, which is both beautiful and a little bit sad.
Yeah, so I have a million things to say in response to that answer. First of all, I love Number the Stars by Lois Lowry.
Yes, me too. One of my favorite books. And this is another interesting place where my acting life and my writing life intersect. I think I was about 16 or 17. I was in a touring production of the play version of Number the Stars. And we toured on the East Coast, sort of up and down, and would do that play for students and then, do Q&As afterwards. And it was so important to me, particularly as a person who is Jewish, to get the opportunity to tell that story and answer questions, oftentimes with audiences who weren't Jewish or maybe didn't know somebody who was, that was a really formative experience for me too, that I think led to me becoming an author, because I got to see firsthand the power of storytelling for those kids to learn about something that didn't directly affect them or didn't happen in their family, but to feel that kind of empathy as if it did. And that was really powerful to me. So I love that book.
Yeah, that's so powerful to me too, because I'm also Jewish, so I can kind of relate to the characters in Counting the Stars. And also, I'm so relieved because nearly every single person, I say this every single interview, and I still have to keep saying it. Every person either wants to be somebody in Harry Potter or references the Harry Potter book. So it's nice to see face.
Oh, interesting. That's funny. Yeah, I liked Harry Potter when it came out. I don't think I ever quite, it didn't get me the way a lot of people, and I can see how it could, but it's not that for me. I appreciate it for what it is. There are pros and cons to the whole Harry Potter verse. My older kid just recently read the Harry Potter books and, enjoyed them and stuff, but I honestly, like them, but I didn't connect with them as strongly as a lot of people, I think, which is okay.
Yeah, I agree. And also the final thing I want to say in response to your answer is just, I love how, not necessarily general your answer was, but just kind of, there's not really a word for it. It's just, I kind of 100% agree. Because adults and kids, kids are very stubborn. I know that from experience. We also don't have all the answers. Nobody really does. So I think that's just a really important answer. It's and The Giver, I really have to read The Giver. It's kind of just a world where it's kind of everybody accepts that, so maybe adults might have a lot of knowledge, but they don't know everything. Kids, we think that we have a lot of knowledge, but we don't know everything.
Yeah, and I think it is both kind of like the infinity thing again. It is exciting and scary to realize that nobody has all the answers and that our parents are human and flawed and fallible. And that was something that was really important to me about writing AfterMath too, was showing that every single character, down from the parents to Mr. Jackson to Avery to Lucy, everybody makes mistakes sometimes, and modeling how they all apologize and own up to it and try and do better, whether it's through therapy or just trying again or just being mindful of it. None of us has it all figured out. And I feel like obviously the world would be a better place if we all got more comfortable with saying, I don't know, maybe I got that one wrong. Let me try again. Or I don't have that answer. Or, hey, let's consult somebody else. Clearly we would not have the wars and the problems we have if every human on earth was comfortable admitting that we don't have everything figured out.
Yeah, and now it's time for the conclusion. I'm very sad that this has to end. I really enjoyed our discussion. I enjoyed your answers.
Thank you.
So, to all of you listening, you can find Emily Barth Isler on Instagram and on Twitter. She's active on both. And you can also check out her website. And stay safe. Happy reading. Well, I'll see you in the next one. And I hope we can stay in touch, Emily.
Oh, I hope so too. I love talking to you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.